I know you are. Yeah, I'm good, thank you.
Good.
Hey, Leanne, I just checked on my phone and I just checked YouTube. It is streaming.
It's going there because it won't let me click to it to be able to mute it. So once I start recording, there's going to be a lot of feedback if I can't mute it. Why isn't it coming out?
Gotcha.
Dan, this is Dan. Did you say you're not able to mute the YouTube?
Yeah,
Oh, that's odd. If you click on the little speaker icon, that doesn't let you do that?
hold on, I'm connecting. There we go. Hold on 1 second. There we go. Okay. Okay, it is muted. Okay, we're good.
Great.
One more second. Okay. All right. So I'm ready to start recording. Are you ready, Dale?
I'm ready. So let's do the call of order. So everybody, good morning and welcome to the Regional Transportation Commission of Washoe County Regional Road Impact Fee Technical Advisory Committee. Today is Thursday, February 25th, 2021, and the time is 8:37 a.m. Leanne, let's do a roll call.
Okay. Alex Velto,
Here.
Amy Cummings.
This is Dan Dengis sitting in for Amy.
Thank you, Dan. Brian Stewart,
This is Dale Keller sitting in for Brian.
Jim Rundle,
This is Jim Rundle sitting in for Jim Rundle.
John Klimpotic,
Here.
John Erickson,
Present.
Craig Newton,
Here.
Kurt Dietrich, Larry Chesney,
Here.
Mike Michelle,
Present.
Mitch Fink,
Here.
Peter Gower, Randy Walter,
Here.
Shelley Reed,
Here.
Ted Erkin. Okay, so we have a quorum. And for the record, I also show from the RTC, we have Adam Spear, Blaine Peterson, Hannah Yu, Leanna Levis, Yelena Williams, Sarah Going, and Yini Russo. Did I miss anyone from the RTC?
Great, thank you, Leanne. And for everybody, let's welcome Shelley Reed, our newest member to our Technical Advisory Committee, representing City of Sparks Planning Commission. So welcome, Shelley.
Thank you. Glad to be here.
Great. So moving on to agenda item number 2, public comment. Leanne, did we receive any public comment for today's meeting?
No, no public comment was received.
Great. No action is needed from the committee, so moving on to agenda item number 3, approval of agenda. Is there any questions, comments, any recommendations for approval?
Move to approve. Second.
So we have a motion from John Erickson, second from, I think that's
Craig.
Craig Knudsen. Yep. All in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Any opposed?
Aye.
Motion passes. So moving on to agenda number 4, consent items. And the only thing on our consent item is the approval of the January 28, 2021 meeting minutes. And just for everybody's information, you see this agenda item has changed just to be more consistent with our all of our public meetings moving forward, all of our committee meetings, as well as our RTC board meetings. So how these are listed are just being more consistent with all of our meetings. So Leanne, do we need, or Adam, do we need a motion on the consent items? I believe we do.
You're being very noisy.
My motion.
Motion by Mr. Knutson. Do we have a second?
Second from Potic.
Second from Potic. All in favor, please say aye.
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 Any opposed? Motion passes. So let's move forward to agenda item number 5.1, acknowledge receipt of report of COVID-19 impacts on transportation trends related to traffic volumes and vehicles mile travel. I'm going to be leading the presentation on this agenda item, and I will share my screen if you're okay with that, Leanne. All right, everybody should be able to see my screen. So at the last RRIF TAC meeting, there was a comment from Mr. Kapotic about how has RTC been tracking any of the COVID-19 transportation trends and what's been either being seen regionally on the statewide level and nationwide. So in your agenda packets, there's a couple of attachments we'll touch upon, and this presentation will follow through on those items. So the first one, this is a graph from the Nevada Department of Transportation talking about the amount of volume that's dropped since the beginning of the pandemic. In the Reno-Sparks area, it dropped roughly about 34% in the April through June timeframe of 2020. And as you see from the lighter colors to the darker is more to the January to February 2021 timeframe. And you see on a statewide level the different impacts across the different regions in the Nevada and within the state. And we still, from January to February, we're still down in the Reno area about 13% from traffic volumes. In addition, this graph shows what the I-80 corridor looked like through downtown Reno, and what from the year before in orange, which is in 2019, versus what's happened in 2020. You still see we are still trending. There's still a gap of what the monthly average daily traffic would be over year. So similarly on the nation stage throughout the states, you see the total vehicles miles traveled is still below what was previously, from before. Let me restart over on this one. So this graph represents Streetlight Data, which is a firm that tracks cell phone data across the country, and they show the total what the rebound would be in the U.S. And what you see here is the same-day average. You see the dip that happened with the COVID and shutdowns across the country, and then the rebound back up. And one of the questions was, and I think was, hey, has the volumes rebounded enough? Are we back to normal levels or not? And it varies on different parts of the country. And what the Smart Street data has kind of identified a few of the trends and grouped it on different factors. And there's demographic factors that you see that is reflecting on higher income, higher average population density, and higher shares of professional service employment. So states that with a faster recovery tend to have a lower income level, lower population density, and fewer professional service jobs. And that's what you see in yellow, rebounding a little bit more quickly, or have in black full recovery from pre-COVID numbers. You see in the darker blue, they have a bigger dip and slow recovery, and those are more of the populations that have the denser density population. For Nevada, you see we're right in line with the national average for that year-over-year comparison. And this is reflecting for July of 2020 VMTs. So the rebound is, you can tell it's different between, but Nevada's, I think, right in line with the national average for rebounding. So how does this reflect us regionally and with our fuel Tax Report, and this is something from our finance team has provided from numbers from 2020, this past December. So Washoe County gallons for gas sold decreased about 7.72% compared to December last year. And statewide, we're still down about 3.6% compared to the last year, the December of 19. And the overall diesel sales, though, were up 9.36% compared to the same month in December of 2019. So what does this mean for dollar-wise and revenue collected? Even though that even the gallons sold were less, the thing that's been a savior for us is the fuel index. And you see what year over year was only negative 0.28% of revenue collected. And after this presentation, I know we have some of our finance team on this call too, on this meeting. They can answer any of those type of questions as well. So for long-term trends and what we don't know is it's too early to tell, and we need more data. One of the national trends that we've seen across from ITE as well as from that traffic report from Streetlight is that there's less peak congestion, meaning that there's the morning flow has been spread across more evenly, and the peaked hours are less. One thing to note, though, the INDOT's data has not shown that in Washoe County on our major freeways, and is still you still see that normal peak that occurs in both AM and PM commutes. The bicycling community has shown an overall decrease that matched the VMTs, so cars are staying home, bikes are staying home. However, though, on weekends, you saw a lot more people hitting the roads and biking during the summer of last year. So what does this mean for the future? And Dan can touch upon this a little bit more too, is the transportation planning. I think we still need more data to see what the rebound rates are, and if this really has changed how we've moved and commute around our region, and then understanding what these in-person workers are in their essential roles. So with that, I'll be happy to answer any questions that the committee might have.
Hey, Dale, this is John. On slide 2 and 3, did NDOT have the modal splits, with regards to, was this a drop in passenger vehicles versus, or was it a drop in, overall, the 13 vehicle types for, determining easels and what have you?
Good question. I believe Sarah Goings on the call as well. Sarah, can you answer that question for John?
Hi, Sarah Going, RTC Engineering. I wish I could answer that question for John. I actually don't know if this is split by mode. I think it's total vehicle miles as counted on the freeway.
Yeah, because I think that, and John, correct me if I'm wrong, in your question that you had at our last meeting, you were trying to figure out, what different trip generation categories were affected through COVID. And Jim Rundle and I had a discussion about this after you raised this question, and we feel, or in our discussion, we pointed that we think that the reduction in residential trips certainly are going to be affected, but the trips that you go to the store, you get deliveries and things of that nature aren't going to change, and so that was just in just a sidebar conversation that I had with Jim Rundle.
Hey, John, this is Dan Denges. I do know kind of nationwide trends, and I believe NDOT was looking at this too, because they're updating their rail study, which is somewhat related, but it seems as though freight traffic is up just because people were utilizing more delivery type services, like going through Amazon, that sort of thing. So while I guess what you'd call residential traffic was down, just anecdotally, some trends I've seen across the nation shows that there was an increase during freight traffic. I don't know that's going to be sustained, but at least during COVID, that's kind of what it was indicating.
Sure. Yeah. And then Dale, just one last question. On the long-term trend slide, the NDOT data, it appears that they haven't seen during peak time. But this slide here shows that during that the trips are down, through I-80 downtown. I'm just kind of curious to know that so the peak times aren't affected, but the trips are down. That's kind of conflicting.
And Sarah might be able to better explain that, but the overall VMT is down, but you still see the peak of congestion that you normally see in your morning and evening commutes versus what you see on some of these more. And in in your board packet, it has a better description about some of these more denser regions, like for San Francisco. What they're seeing in the AM peak congestion is no longer that high peak of morning commute, is more spread across, let's just say 2 hours.
Okay.
But what we're seeing here in Washoe County, my understanding, we still have the same normal kind of peak curve.
Okay, thank you. That's all I had.
Thank you, Dale. I know I was audio check okay?
Yes, sir.
Okay. Yeah, I brought some of this up, and I do appreciate John's questions because we touched on remember in bringing this up last month, the idea of trip gen and specifically how residential trip gen characteristics may change, and particularly employment, right? Because we were talking we were talking about people working at home was a key piece to this. So, but I think this is great data. It's surprisingly I thought there would be greater reductions. There's not. That's but what's intuition in this case, right? We don't know. You just got a measuring stick of a 6-month trend here. So, and I think your first bullet point on this slide says a lot. It's too early to tell, isn't it? Need more data. It will shake out over time. But you remember, the anecdotal part of this is and you know what? Maybe it's right. Most of the people, or perhaps everybody on this in this meeting, on this call, are professionals, and there are more. That's the people. When I look at what's going on and talking with people in Northern Cal that are working for those major technology companies, that work at home full time, but it's the professional component, and so that doesn't explain. It's just a very small segment of society, and in my mind, that might be exaggerated a bit. So it's good information. Thank you very much.
You're welcome. Any other comments on this agenda item 5.1?
Yeah, the only question I have is there consensus amongst NDOT and RTC to try to continue to monitor this and look at some of the data as it comes across and see if there are any changes as we move forward?
Dan, you want to take that one?
Sure, thank you. Yeah, I think NDOT is continuing to monitoring it. I mean, they do annual traffic counts, and they've been interesting this last year. So they're going to see how those trends may or may not continue going forward. And we certainly work closely with them. We do utilize a lot of their traffic count information, and obviously with the focus here in Washoe County. So I think RTC, this is something that we're going to be tracking as well to the best of our ability. Both not only the vehicle traffic, but active modes of transportation too. We're trying to refine our methods for collecting like bicycle trips and pedestrian trips and those sort of things as well. So we'll continue to watch that.
And to add upon that, from the traffic engineering side, as we do our traffic timing with our signalizations, that when we work with UNR, the term to look at those different congestion points and the peak flows, and we'll continue to monitor that, make adjustments as needed for our current signal timing. Great. Any other comments on just agenda item 5.1? Not hearing any more, do I have a motion to acknowledge receipt of a report of the COVID-19 impacts on the transportation trends?
Motion to accept the report.
Second, Krompottek.
Got a motion and a second. Any other discussion? All in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Any opposed? Motion passes. Moving on to agenda item 5.2, acknowledge receipt of report of project list of the draft 2050 regional transportation plan. So on this agenda item, there's no formal report or presentation. This was a follow-up item from the January meeting. If there are any discussions, I believe we included the list of projects, and Dan can further discuss any changes that happened between January and now February.
Yeah, and I guess thanks for the floor, Dale. I'm just Dan just for planning manager for the record, just to let you know, the draft RTP is out for public comment. It is still a draft version. There's a few things we've got to kind of clean up a little bit, but we do have a 21-day public comment period that is kicking off today, and will culminate just before our March board meeting, in which we'll have a public hearing tentatively scheduled for plan adoption. Along with that, we're hoping to concurrently adopt an update to our regional transportation improvement program, which essentially is like the first 5 years of the RTP and outlines those projects in the first 5 years. So our air quality analysis preliminary results show that we are within what's called the motor vehicle emissions budgets. That's thresholds that are set by the EPA. So basically it shows that all of our proposed projects and the VMT that it's forecasted to generate will not cause emissions to cross those thresholds, and thereby will still meet the air quality standards and reach what's called transportation conformity. So with that, happy to answer any other questions.
Any questions for Dan? And if any of the members like, we can put up the maps on the screen too to show the projects again, if anybody would like.
You know, I just got one quick one for you, Dan. This is John. Have you guys worked out any issues with regional with regards to the modeling with respect to what Schwinn's working with in the Transcab model?
Yeah, we were able to get their forecast data. They went through and refined their suitability factors and gave us some updated data, which we did incorporate into our travel demand model. And so, you know, we had all the forecast traffic volumes from there and got the VMT, which we were able to then use as inputs into the air quality model. So long story short, yes, I think we're good. I believe Schwinn is on the call. She has anything to add.
You answered my question, Dan. Thank you.
Sure, thanks.
Any other discussion on this draft list of projects from the 2050 RTP? All right, hearing none, may I have a motion to accept receipt of report on this project list of the draft 2050 RTP?
So moved. This is Alex.
Thank you, Alex. Do we have a second?
Second, Craig.
Thank you, Craig. Any other discussion on this item? Hearing none, all in favor, please say aye.
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 Any opposed? Motion passes. Thank you, Dan, and thank you, RTC Planning, for their efforts getting this moved forward. Moving on to agenda item 5.3, acknowledge receipt of report of the RRIF General Administrative Manual and projects proposed to be included in the RRIF CIP. I will again take the lead on this agenda item, and I'll share my screen. Give me 1 second, please. Okay, so there's during this presentation, there's two things I'd like to provide an update to the RRIF TAC on. is the first one, and I'll stop the talk to discuss each of these points separately. So the first one is, it was the draft list of projects that was included in the RRIF CIP from the January meeting. That the list between the North Benefit District and the South Benefit District is included again in your agenda packets. One thing to note, and one thing that was erroneously omitted, was the privately constructed roads. And so here's the list of the privately constructed roads. This list is reflected in the 2050 RTP. Once again, this is, and we can have a more detailed discussion if need be, but this is ones that we're showing that the funding source is private going through. So is there any discussions from last meeting as a follow-up on the RRIF CIP list of projects?
Hey, Dale, I just got one question. I'm assuming that these are just 2-lane facilities. Is that correct?
They differ. And so this is one thing that as we talk about, and then my second part of this presentation, we talk about how we develop our RRIF fees. So some of these improvements would be eligible for RRIF offset waivers, if that's the case. So this just shows how they're being funded. It doesn't mean that they would not be eligible for RRIF funds if they're RRIF eligible.
Okay, great. Thank you.
Dale, just to comment on the list, it looks like a majority of the developments occurring in the North Benefit District.
There are, and so we'll talk about, and this is the privately funded roadways. So this is new roadways that come, not projects that were identified previously as existing roads that may need capacity. That would be developer share of roadway widenings per se. So these are new roadways.
Okay.
For the most part, right? And so maybe that's a good transition, Jim, to talk about, and this is a great segue to the second part of this, how do we generate our RRIF revenue fees? And that's where kind of stage we are at in the process. And then second, how does that reflect on the eligibility part of that for either developing that fee and then for our offset waiver agreement? So just as a reminder, this is the same slide we showed last time about where we are in the process, and develop an impact fee program. First, we need to determine how and where the growth is going to be anticipated to occur. As Jim pointed out, there's a lot of growth in the North Benefit District. And then second is the capacity projects which are needed to accommodate that growth. And so this is a basic diagram that outlines the steps following, steps included to develop that fee, beginning with, hey, in red, what is our TMRPA land development sources and the consensus forecast that we've received previously. And Dan and Amy Cummings with the RTC planning is developing our RTC travel demand model, which now we're looking to finalize our regional transportation plan in that long term. And so now we're taking in the blue area the first 10 years of what was previously presented for the RRIF CIP list of projects. And now we need to determine, and you'll see here in the last couple of slides about schedule, determining the cost associated with the developer share of the RRIF CIP cost, which then would equate to RRIF fees. And we calculate the fees for dollars per VMT, and then we spit out the fee based off the North and South Benefit District. So once again, high level process. You can see my mouse, we're right in this stage, and we're going to be moving pretty quickly in the next 3 to 4 months to get the new edition updated and at least present a draft one to the RRIF TAC here. So let's talk about eligibility and how do we break down to determine what the developer's fair share cost would be for these projects. And this is going to make your head spin a little bit. And what you see here on the screen and the next screen are definitions that are in our current 6th edition of our RRIF GAM. And I'm going to start from high level and I'm going to come like a tree and bring it down. So, and I'll highlight some of the things in these definitions, but I just want to reiterate the eligibility of both on how do we generate the fee, and the second on what's eligible for if we enter into an offset waiver agreement. So everything, how we have it currently defined, is based off the RRIF network. And so the RRIF network, as you see here, this is actually the whole definition that we have it. This new roads on the bottom is part of the definition of RRIF network. So As a network of roads consists of high expressways, moderate major arterial, and low minor arterial access roadways, not including freeways, but including freeway ramps determined by the RTC as regionally significant. And then any other collector roads that have a forecast volume of 14,000 average trips per day at the build out condition. So for our time at the 2050 year. Actually, yep. And the second part of that is the new roadways. And you saw that new roadway list that was shown on the privately funded, what would be new roadways to our RRIF network system. And you see there in the last 3 rows is that the first 2 lanes are constructed, and it provides sufficient connection between regional roads and serves regional traffic in excess of the proposed development, meaning that RRIF eligible would be after the first 2 lanes would not be needed or not be RRIF eligible, but anything greater than that would be eligible for RRIF funds. So that's overall top definition, which is very long, cumbersome definition. So we take this a step further to say, what's RRIF eligible improvements? And this is a very simple definition. It might be too simple per se. Any non-site related RRIF capital improvements, right? So if it doesn't have a project for that development and is not for that site, then it would be considered a RRIF eligible or non-related RRIF capital improvements. So we got to take that a step further down, which gets, once again, makes my head spin a little bit as well, is that definition of RRIF capital improvement. So it needs to have, in order to be a RRIF eligible improvement, it has to have the capacity adding improvements or expands the RRIF network. So we talked about the RRIF network on the previous slide, and that has to be included in the capital improvement plan in the CIP or any of the anything related to that. So what's included in that CIP, right? So we have a roadway shown. That also includes traffic signals. Includes the right-of-way, and this is the A through E here, engineering costs associated with that, new roadway, through lanes, turn pockets, bridges, if that's the case, any relocation of utilities, and lastly, drainage facilities, street lighting, signalization, curbing, sidewalks, median, and so forth. So it's a very expanded definition. And so what does that mean? So I thought maybe the best to provide clarity on these definitions to provide an example. So here's an example of a recently approved offset waiver agreement in City of Sparks for Wingfield Hills Road. And what you see here highlighted in the color were the offered improvements. So in this case, everything here was showing what would be RRIF eligible. And some type of either 100% or a percentage from there. So in theory too, we're doing this with our new roadway fees as we start calculating for our RRIF fee generation. So we'll go through the same exercise that you see here that went through by the developer as we generate what developer's fair share is for a new roadway. So we're going through that process now and making some assumptions. So here's another kind of just a cross-section view showing what would be eligible, what is not eligible, and maybe what the percentages would be of developers' responsibility. So you see here we've broken out for the additional lane. You see some additional curb color and sidewalk, and then here's some what we identified as RTC offset eligible improvements below here. So this is something that we go through in a high level from a planning side that we try to capture what those costs were to help generate the dollars per VMT per service area. And to follow this up is talk about what are we required by statute to do and what NRS 278B requires us to do, and how we talk about service units. And I guess NRS requires that capital facilities be expressed in these service units, and that's paraphrasing there, but also the statute defines that the service units are a standardized measure of consumption or use, meaning that we have to understand what that is and attribute that to a individual unit of development calculated per that particular category of that capital improvement. So we have to have that, here's a need and here's what the benefit is, and to define what that service unit would look like. And so per our RRIF GAM definition, and this talks about one of the things we looked at possibly deleting is those statewide spot improvement projects. So my second bullet point here is says traffic signals that are still RRIF eligible based off the definitions that we currently have, right? As long as they're part of that RRIF network and incorporated in a CIP project as one of those roadway capacity projects. And so what we're proposing for eliminating some of those statewide spot improvement projects is really simplifying what that service units would when calculating our RRIF fees. And then second, provide clarity for offset eligible improvements identified in the RRIF CIP. So just provide a more simplistic identification of service units. And then second is provide that clarity back to the development community as we're looking for what would be offset eligible. And this is the last slide, talk about next steps and schedule. So we're still looking through and determining possible editorial changes as well as eligibility determinations for the next edition. And the other big item we want to look into is appeals process. So those items will still be presented back to the RRIF TAC committee here in the next couple months. As I said, some of the next steps we're doing internally here at the RTC is calculating what that RRIF fee is going to be, and then updating the GAM and the CIP manual. So you'll see in March and April, those editorial changes as we work through them and provide and allow the committee to provide input to those changes as we're looking into that. And so that's what you'll see next month in March, as well as in April, that presentation of the RRIF fee calculation and determining what the fee for the both North and South would be from the new 7th edition. Then lastly, in May and June time period, we'll present a red line version of what that changes would be from the 6th to the 7th in the RRIF CIP and the GAM manuals. So with that, I'll be happy to answer any questions. I know that was a lot out of there, and hopefully I didn't lose you, but I just want to talk about some of the current definitions that we have to determine eligibility for our RRIF program.
I have a question, Dale.
Yes,
Can you
sir.
go to the first slide, please?
Mhm.
Just by way of background and education here, excuse me, I thought it was, okay, second, scroll down to that 14,000 ADT threshold.
Okay.
Is that, first of all, what is driving this? And bear with me, I might be a little bit naive on that. Is this just taking a close look at updating this, or what's driving this?
Yeah, so what's driving this is just making sure that we are clear, and is there a better way to look at or define eligibility? And
thank you.
To me, we have to look at 3 or 4 different definitions to determine what the eligibility is of either for our RRIF program or have an offset eligible improvement.
Okay, perfect. Yeah, and on the 14,000, let's see, that's at build out. No, is that right? Anyway, I remember 5,000 back in the day, and then 10,000 more recently when he updated the RRIF. Is this a new number? This 14,000?
No, sir. So this is what's currently in our current 6th edition.
Thank you. For some reason, I thought it was 10,000. That's just wanted clarity and understanding.
Yeah, John. This is Randy. For your historical perspective, the 14,000 was kind of pulled out of the air as a number. It in fact probably needs to be defined better than it is. The intent is the first 2 lanes. The first 2 lanes has a 14,000 ADT. That's a real generalized definition. We used it to get through the change that we had to make way back. I forget which edition it was, but it was necessary to come up with something. We used 14,000. I think if we have an opportunity to make some clarity to that, I think it'd be helpful, because if you look up above, you see all the different designations of roadways. Well, the ADTs that determine whether it's 2 lanes or 4 lanes depends on the definition of what those roadways are. So I think we need to look at a little bit heavier on that number, because quite frankly, it was just pulled out of the air.
It's not entirely pulled out of the air, Randy, and I appreciate your point here, but right there is some relationship to that, and and capacity and all of that, right?
Mhm.
Yeah. The reason I ask is because remember, you reminded me, Randy, is that I'm going to just say we had an incentive to create fraudulent regional roads with that 5,000 ADT threshold back.
Yes,
in the day.
that's correct. That's why the change occurred.
Yeah. Okay.
If I may, I can add a little bit to this. The 14,000 is actually a defensible number, and it's based on level of service of the segment. And I believe, Dale, you can correct me if I'm wrong. It's based on the accepted level of service that the RTP has adopted, and I think that the 14,000 is, I think it's more like 14,700 or 14,000 and change, something like that. But it's based on the level of service of the segment, and that's where that number came from, if I remember correctly.
That's correct, John.
Thank you.
Need to take one of the arrows off.
So Dale, just to jump
I'm over.
what John said there. 14 is the point where you go beyond 2 lanes and still achieve level of service. Is that my understanding?
Correct.
14.7 is the point where you need to go to a 4-lane road. So
Depends
as
on the
long as you're
definition of the roadway.
No, I respectfully disagree with you, Randy. It has nothing to do with the classification of the roadway. It has to do with the volume of the road and the level of service that was adopted by the RTP, which is, I believe that's a level of service of D, so that it doesn't go into an E. So I believe that's the where that number came from. But Dale, if you wouldn't mind adding that to your list of things to take a peek at for next meeting and circle back on this 14,000 so we all understand where it came from.
Agree. And
Okay,
there's different thresholds of where we have a level of service D or E, depending on the number of how much volume there is on a roadway. So that does change. So we can provide, once again, the point was, hey, how do we make this clear, and let's get some better input from the TAC of 14,000. That's definitely one thing we'll look into to provide more clarity with. Because you're right, to Randy, your point is, hey, we got all these different roadways, and we're not, it's very generalized over the overall volume capacity too. So
I think that came in, Dale, maybe in the 5th edition.
yeah, Jim, I think you're correct. I think what you see here my understanding is from the 6th edition, a lot of things were rolled over from the 5th. The 5th was where we had a lot of the major changes, where we went away from credits and went to this waiver program. So yes.
Yeah, it was all part of the change from credits to waivers. This is one of the many things that were changed.
John, did you have any other questions, comments?
No, I'm good. Thank you.
Hey, Dale, I just got a couple of comments that, because we just went through the RRIF agreements with both Lennar and with Christie Corp out there in Kylie Ranch North. The one thing that I want to make sure that the developers understand is that storm drain, a proportional share of the storm drain would also be RRIF eligible. And so that's just something to keep in mind. And then Dale, with regards to traffic signals, I know that you suggested that we take out the spot improvements. How will those costs for traffic signals be captured in the CIP?
So each of the roadway projects that we have listed in the CIP, if we believe that there needs to be new traffic signals, that's an incorporated part of the cost. So that's what some people look into. And then as we dive in that a little bit further, that's something we'd recognize that'd be 100% eligible for RRIF funding.
Who makes that determination?
That's something that we work with the RTC. We'll start with that process as we have our list of our RRIF CIPs, then we start doing the calculations, their fees. So next month, or most likely in April at the latest, you will see the overall calculation of the overall genesis of that. So it's really a working spreadsheet that we work in with local agencies to determine the eligibility of each project, right? The RRIF share of that. I know that's not a straightforward answer, Randy. There's a lot of back and forth that we look into. And as you saw from the example from the Wingfield Hills Road, is we're trying to do this exercise with all the projects listed in the RRIF CIP to determine what that share would be for RRIF eligible funding.
I know it's complicated. I've done it a few times myself.
Any other questions on the RRIF game update here?
I just got one last comment. Dale, can you kind of give us an idea of what your thoughts are on the appeals process and why the RTC is looking at a different appeals process?
Good question, John. So on a high level, and we'll present more data to you here in the next couple months on what that would look like. As we look through the appeals process in the RRIF GAM, it's in a section, and I'm going to misquote this, but it's not in the best section to identify what's eligible or not. It's in a section, from my understanding, that this shows on the land use type and how to determine what your fee was. If a developer came in, they want to do their own analysis with their determination of their land use and their fee and their VMT development. That is where the appeal process lies in. It's not about eligibility determination. So we might be a little bit silent, or there might be better clarification that we can provide in the RRIF GAM. And I see Adam just jumped on. If you want to expand on that, Adam.
Hey, everyone. Yeah, I think that's part of it. Trying to make sure we're clear. In the GAM, there's a number of areas where it says what is and isn't appealable, but then the appeals process itself seems to be potentially broader. So we want to clarify that. And then we also want to make sure that we have the right bodies making those appeal determinations at the end. So we're looking at different options for that. Right now it goes from the staff level and the administrator level to the RRIF TAC, and then up to the RTC board. And so we're evaluating other options there too.
Thank you.
I have another question on the information that was sent out with the agenda on the list of projects. And I haven't had a chance to look at it in enough detail, so I'm going to talk off the top of my head here for a minute. There seems to be a lot of red line changes that were made relative to determination of need or something to that effect. Can you kind of expound on that a little bit, so I've got a better idea why those projects were taken off the list?
I can, and maybe I'll ask Dan to jump into. So some of the projects that were in red were reflected in what was in the 2050 RTP changes. And that's the majority of the reason why, is because they're no longer considered in the 2050 RTP. And I'll pull up, if you can see my screen now, for example, let's take a look at a lot of these where the improvements were constructed. So for example, this loop road, Solomon Eastern Road, this was no longer being considered in the 2050 RTP. Since it was not part of our regional plan anymore, this project fell out within the RRIF CIP.
Okay, that helps. I was just curious as to where that determination was made.
Any additional comments? Hearing none, I'm looking for a motion to acknowledge receipt of the report.
Move to accept.
Chesney, second.
Thank you, John and Larry. Any further discussions on this item? Hearing none. All in favor, please say aye.
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 Any opposed? Motion passes. Moving on to agenda item number 6, member announcements and updates. Is there any announcements from the members or any updates at this time for topics or for future agenda items?
Hey, Dale, just so that you know, we're working closely with Stonebrook West on their agreements. So I just wanted to give you a heads up that I'll be probably reaching out to you here shortly, and we'll get those right-of-way and road construction agreements going.
Great, thank you, John. Hearing no other announcements, we will move to agenda item number 7, public comment. Leanne, any other public comment received?
No, there is no other public comment received.
Great. All right, no actions needed from the committee, so moving on to agenda 8, adjournment. Do we have a motion to adjourn?
So
See
moved.
you. Second.
Randy, so moved. Second, John Erickson. All in favor, please say aye.
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 Aye. Anybody opposed and wants to stay here? Thank you all for your time. Meeting is adjourned.
Thank you.
It is 9:27 a.m. Thanks all.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.